Ephesians 4:19. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. Colossians 2:23. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. 1 Timothy 5:11. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Okay, so in terms of distinguishing between sensitivity and sensuality, sensuality is not always referring to sexuality. What it's referring to are the senses which the flesh wants to indulge. The flesh wants instant gratification, so it can include sexuality, lust, sexual impurity. But ultimately, what Paul is alluding to is fleshly, sensual indulgence, the desires of the flesh. Now, he talks in Ephesians 4:19 about sensitivity. If you are a person who in your lifetime have been accused of being overly sensitive or intense is a way to automatically dismiss you for having feelings and for being sensitive, this video might give you some comfort and validation. Sensitivity is incredibly important to godly living. And Paul highlights that in Ephesians. There's something about sensitivity that he is placing up as being good, and sensuality, which he is placing as not good, as leading to impurity. Sensitivity is when you are attuned to your heart. It's when you're attuned to the information that God has given you in your feelings. Sensuality is when you're out of the heart and into the flesh, and you live according to gratification and indulgence, what your flesh wants, and that's what you're chasing. A person who is sensitive is going to do things like hold others accountable, share their feelings, let you know when they've been hurt, let people know when they don't like something or when they need something. And that has been posed as an imposition on people in the world. A desensitized person is cognitive, they're disconnected, they intellectualize things, and the world loves this, even promoting New Age detachment, right? Like, that's a good thing. That's a sign of mental health, to be detached. Actually, it's not. And sometimes New Age or the world will even talk about attunement, but they'll tell you nowhere to go. Like, there's never a solution. There's never understanding. It's just like you sit in therapy and you talk about how you feel about something, but there's nowhere to go with it. They're not leading you back to God. They're not leading you to actually processing what you're feeling for the purpose for which God intended in your design, as information to be sorted through first with yourself and then with God. It's very difficult to have relationships with people when you are not attuned to what it is that you feel, because all you end up doing is just kind of going through the motions and not really making a connection with that other person at a heart level. There's no vulnerability, there's no intimacy, and there's no connection, and that makes it really easy for people to leave you. It actually ends up making you more vulnerable than if you had just shared your vulnerable feelings and then paid attention to how the other person is responding to you. Are they capable of reciprocating that? Are they capable of caring about your feelings? And see, this becomes very problematic in relationship with God as well, because if you are not attuned to the way that you feel, and this is the way that you handle relationships, is just sort of in a detached, cognitive manner, God is not going to meet you there. You're not going to hear from him. You're not going to feel him. You're not going to perceive when he's talking with you, because you're not connected to the places where he talks with you. God is spirit. He's going to communicate with your spirit. God also says that when he makes you a new creation, he removes your heart of stone, places in you a heart of flesh, and places his spirit in your heart. So if you're not connected to your heart and you're out there in your carnality, you're out there in your flesh, you will inevitably never hear from God, because he is not going to meet you there. He's already told you, commanded you, as a matter of fact, in the covenant of circumcision, to be circumcised in your heart from the sinful flesh. If you're supposed to be cut off from your heart to the sinful flesh, like cut off from the sinful flesh in your heart, where are you supposed to live? In the heart, where God placed his spirit, communicating with God's spirit by your spirit. So you live in the heart and spirit. Now, I want to contrast emotionality versus attunement, because there's a big difference. There are some people who consider themselves very emotional, and they would attribute being emotional to being attuned. And that's incredibly incorrect. It's actually totally the opposite. I'm sure you've met people like this. You talk to them about something having to do with you, and they take it on to be about themselves. Maybe they start crying, or they start talking about themselves, and they become very dysregulated. And it's clear that your situation that started out about you has now become about them, because they are not processing their stuff. They seem to have a lot of feelings, but none of them have been processed so that they are a regulated person who can communicate well and actually be there for other people. This is not a sensitized person, and it is not an attuned person. This is a dysregulated person, a person who is not taking responsibility for their feelings and is actually afraid of that attunement. And so there's almost like a fabrication of emotion at times and a flooding of emotion at times. None of their feelings have delineation. They can't really tell you what they're feeling at any given time because there's not a delineation between all of the many feelings that they are having. And this becomes problematic because this is a person who is not processing the information that God has given them. This makes them incapable of connecting with others. It's actually the thing that stands between them and others, and it makes them incapable of connecting with God. When you hear the description of a person who is desensitized, who is detached, who is disconnected, cognitive, flesh-based, intellectualizing, you know that that person is creating distance between the two of you, but you may not have realized that a person who is over-emotional, not sensitive, but is over-emotional, is actually using all of that mess to prevent intimacy and vulnerability. They think that they're being vulnerable because they're over-emotional, because they're wearing all of this emotion. And don't you see how vulnerable I'm being? But it's actually blocking you from connecting with them because they're not connected to themselves and they can't be connected to you. They don't have a regulated or processed sense of what is going on inside of them. Let's talk about what's in the middle and what is supposed to be. A sensitized person understands what they're feeling, is attuned to what they're feeling, and when they start feeling those feelings, they engage in a process by which they are able to, in a childlike way, not a childish way. Emotionality would be childish, running would be childish, shutting off would be childish. A childlike way is a way in which internally that person is able to kind of talk through, well, right now I feel really hurt. I really wanted to spend time with this person today, and I'm wondering, why don't they want to spend time with me? This is the second time they've blown me off. And then they're able to kind of talk through those feelings rather than these two other versions. One, the intellectualizing, detached, and disconnected. That person's a jerk. They're always doing this. I'm not going to have anything to do with them. How does that work for relationships, by the way? If that's where you go in order to protect yourself, you're not going to be able to have a conversation in which you let the person know how you feel and then you pay attention to how they respond. They are capable of responding to your feelings. Are they repentant, or do they just sort of placate you? And the fruit of repentance, by the way, is change. Placation means that that person can say what needs to be said in the moment, but there's no change. And that gives you your answer as to whether they're capable of love. And that gives you your answer as to what kind of spirit is in that person and whether they should be in your life. Isn't that more protective than cutting people off? Or situation number 2, unloading all of your emotions onto that person so that they then have to take care of you, or they run away from you because the overwhelm that you're feeling, you're now getting out all over them. A sensitive person is sensitized, attuned to the feelings that God has given them and the design, and they understand their design. They understand that they have certain feelings, that they don't need those feelings to overtake them, but that they know how to deal with those feelings for the information that God is providing to them. And then they can have a conversation. They can soothe themselves, and they can have conversations with people in which they share, this is what I was feeling in this situation. And they can pause and step back and have the presence of mind to pay attention to whether or not that person is truly able to be repentant, hear their feelings, respond to their feelings, and be accountable. Now, how does this work in relationship with God? Listen, there are things that God does that we don't understand his ways. I am going through things right now that I am saying things like I don't understand the ways of God. But I need to process my own feelings and then bring to God, bring to my Father what my questions are. These are the things that I've done, Lord. Father, I understood that these were the things that you required of me, and that your word says this, and that you have made certain promises to me in your word regarding your faithfulness. Have I misunderstood? Here's the thing. I often do not hear people engaging in that kind of a process, that kind of a dialogue with God, with their Father, as though it's not a dialogue that they can have with him. As though relationship with God is just us sort of speaking out our prayers into the air. And then oftentimes what I see people doing is making up the answers that they get from God. When you are sensitized or attuned to what it is that you feel, you'll be able to communicate that with others, including God. Not that he needs for you to do that for him, as though you need to somehow explain to him how you're feeling or explain your heart to him. I mean, really, he knows our hearts better than we do. But it is your personal accountability requirement to sort through your internal experience and the information that God has given you so that you can have conversations with others that are personally accountable. This is how I feel. This is what I need. Are you able to do that? Where are we at in our relationship? Is this what you want? Because this is what I want. Are we in agreement? And there's a similar dialogue that you have with your Father. Here are the things I understood. Have I been mistaken? I understood that these are the things that you want from me, and these are indeed the things that I've done. Have I been mistaken? Has this been a false alarm? Your word says that these are the promises that your people can expect from you. Are we still in agreement? Are we still on the right track? Or is there somewhere I've misunderstood? Do you see how that conversation takes personal accountability for what it is that you're feeling, and then you're able to go to the person or to God and say, is this still what both of us want? Is this still our relationship? Rather than, what I often see people doing, which is totally disconnected and ritualistic and just sort of speaking from carnality. And a lot of times saying stupid things like, I'm just going to say it. I plead the blood of Jesus over this. I rebuke this in the name of Jesus. All of these superficial, ritualistic, what is that doing for you? Where's the relationship between you and God? There's no relationship there. It's just a bunch of words that people have made up in counterfeit Christianity, and then they wonder why they don't hear from God, why they don't feel God, because you're not even attempting to be sensitized to him. It's just a bunch of superficial, rule for this, rule for that, a little here, a little there, ritualized nonsense. I hope this has helped to understand the difference between sensitized, attuned, versus being over-emotional, which is the same thing as being detached. They are literally one and the same. One shuts down and runs, the other is overwhelmed, but both of them are disconnected. Neither one is going to be able to be accountable. Neither one is going to be able to tell you what they feel. They are one and the same reaction. And I realize that the world is a lot more tolerant of those who are intellectualizing, disconnected, detached. They love that because it doesn't bother them. So I will say one thing about that trait, that strategy, is that it's not common for them to be called out. It's not common for people to hold them accountable. And so a lot of people continue this strategy throughout their lives because no one's bothered by it. No one's being held accountable by it. And so they're A-okay. So there are marriages where people live totally parallel to one another and never really intersect in vulnerability or intimacy or relationship. They're just, don't even know each other. And they are perfectly fine with that. Usually the over-emotional people get more feedback from the world. People run from them. People feel that their emotions are an affront. because a lot of times they're going off on people. So they will get more feedback from the world and be a little bit more motivated to actually change their behavior. And a lot of times these are people who have a lot of unresolved suffering, which the world likes to call trauma. All it is unresolved suffering. God requires you to resolve your suffering because he sent it for you to learn from it. So this is something you also need to keep in mind. If you are a person who shuts down and no one gives you any feedback and they're A-okay with the fact that you're just imploding, and I know it's not that these people are not hurt or that they don't feel, they just they won't connect with it. And because they don't connect with it, no one else ever has to connect with them. So it's easy for people to take them for granted, leave them, or separate from them because there wasn't any connection there anyway. If you're one of those people, or if you're on either one of these ends of the continuum, you need to hold yourself accountable, particularly if you're not receiving feedback from the rest of the world. You need to be the one that holds yourself accountable with God. Ask God to help you. Ask him to be the one who confronts you. And then listen. If you're inviting him to do something, then you got to respond. You got to listen. I hope this helps. This is not something that you can just kind of brush over in your covenant, because it very literally has to do with your relationship with God. Are you connecting with him or not? And if you don't get here to having a relationship with God, you won't fulfill your covenant. I'm not saying that to fearmonger you, but it should instill or stir up a fear of God. That there are requirements in your covenant that need to be fulfilled. That you need to be living in the heart and spirit, or you're going to live in the flesh. I mean, that's just, you're either going to live one of two places. And it turns out it requires a lot more intention to live in the heart and spirit. A person who is over emotional or a person who is disconnected is not living in the heart and spirit. They have not learned how to do that. How will you fulfill your covenant? That person or these people who are living there are living in the flesh. Please discern this with God.